Good evening students. In today's video we will be discussing the different stitch classes. So basically we will first start with the definition of stitch. What is a stitch? Stitch is basically one unit of conformation which is formed by intralooping, interlooping and interlacement, and it can use single or more than one thread groups. Or in simple terms we can say stitch is a unit or a loop in a seam. Seam basically is the joint between two pieces of fabric. More than two pieces of fabric can also be joined using a seam, and stitch is basically the building block or the smaller unit of this seam. So here you can see the different stitch classes that are formed on different type of sewing machines. So we will be discussing these classes one by one. Then we'll discuss what is the basis of this classification, that is how the stitches are divided into these 6 classes of stitches. So stitches are classified into 6 classes starting from class 100 to class 600. Class 100 is referred to as single thread chain stitch. Class 200 is hand stitch. That is basically the stitches formed on machine, but it simulates the hand stitches, which is the manual work done using the hand sewing needles. So the same appearance can be made using a special type of needles on the sewing machine. So of course when it is being done by hand or manually, it is time consuming process. So the same kind of stitches, the same appearance can be had on the machine. So this stitch class comes under class 200. Class 300 is classified as the lock stitch. Class 400 is known as the multi-thread chain stitch. Class 500 stitch is referred to as overedge. The same stitch class can also be called safety stitch or the serger stitch. And last but not the least, class 600 is the covering chain stitch. So what is the basis of classification, or we can say what are the factors based on which the stitches are divided into these 6 classes? The stitches can be divided into 6 different classes based on the mechanism of stitch formation. We'll see shortly that the stitches are formed by different mechanisms like intralooping, interlooping and interlacement. So one classification that how the stitches are divided into 6 different classes is based on the mechanism of stitch formation. The second is based on the appearance on face and back side of the fabric. Now all of you will appreciate that irrespective of the type of the sewing thread used, each type of stitch will have some kind of appearance on the face side and a different appearance on the back side. So for example, if we consider this particular example, so here we will see this thread to appear on the face side of the fabric and this on the back side of the fabric. Likewise, all the stitches will portray a different appearance on the face and a different appearance on the back side of the fabric, which also serve as a distinguishing factor or identification for the stitches. Looking at the stitch, we can identify what stitch class it is based on its appearance on the face and on the back side of the garment. We'll discuss it in the later part in more details. The number of sewing threads used for the stitch formation is another basis on which the stitches are classified into these 6 types. Some of these stitches like class 100 just uses one group of sewing thread or a single thread. Some of these stitches, for example, if you consider this stitch class, it shows just one colored thread, red. So it is indicating that one thread is used in making this stitch. Here you can see 3 different color threads. So this is indicating that 3 threads are used in making this stitch. Here the red and the yellow color threads are showing that 2 threads are used in the making of this stitch. So another classification for the stitch classes can be based on the number of sewing threads that are used for forming that stitch. Yet another basis of classification can be the properties of the stitches. Now the stitches, different type of stitches will be consuming different amount of thread. Their construction method or their mechanism will vary. So accordingly they will vary in their properties. So the different stitch classes will have different kind of strength or stretchability. So this property is also related to the application area or end use. So that means based on the property we will decide that for what kind of application, for what end usage that stitch will be used. For example, a stitch which is not very strong, which is a weak or a temporary kind of stitch, will be used for temporary applications on garments, like for basting operations and all. But where we require greater strength, where we require permanent stitching, so there that kind of stitch will be preferred, which is more stronger and durable. Likewise, we will prefer a stitch which is stretchable, which is extensible in such applications like in sportswear and all, where stretchability is the main concern. So property of the stitch is dependent on the number of the threads that it uses, the mechanism by which the stitch is formed, and accordingly based on that property, the application area where that stitch will find its usage will also vary. Yet another classification for the stitches can also be based on mean or mode of making the stitches. So based on this classification, we can divide the stitches into hand stitches and machine stitches. Machine stitches will basically be covered in this presentation, which includes the stitches from class 100 to 600. Hand stitches are those stitches which are basically used for hemming, in manual operations. Hand stitches are used for making buttonholes, for blind hemming purposes. So hand stitches are basically those which are used for manual or heirloom type of sewing operations, where we require more intricate work. So having discussed the classification factors, how the stitches are divided into different classes, now we come to the mechanism of stitch formation. So basically there are three mechanisms by which the stitches are formed. The first one is known as interlooping. As the name suggests, inter means between two. So here the interlooping is that mechanism where the stitch will be formed by two set of threads. Here we can see this is the one thread and this is the second thread. So interlooping is the mechanism by which loop of one thread passes through the loop of the another thread. So as is quite clear that for this mechanism we require two group of threads, the needle thread and the bobbin thread. Bobbin thread or the looper thread we will discuss in the later part of the presentation, is also known as the under thread, which is supplied from the bottom portion of the machine, and the needle thread is supplied from the spool or the cop, which is one kind of thread package mounted on the top of the machine to supply the needle thread. Intralooping is the mechanism where a single thread is used, as can be seen here. This red color thread, a single thread is used for forming this kind of stitch. So loop of one thread passes through the loop of the same thread. The same thread will be going on the downside or the back side of the fabric. It will be forming a single chain, and then it will be going up and forming the stitch on the face portion or the front side of the fabric. So this mechanism by which the stitch is formed is known as intralooping. And the example for this kind of intralooping mechanism is this class 100 single thread chain stitch. So single thread because it uses single thread for the formation of this stitch. Then a third mechanism by which the stitch is formed is known as interlacement. Interlacement means where one thread passes over the another thread. So here we can see one thread is passing over the another thread. So interlacement is more or less similar to the interlacement of warp and weft we have observed or studied in woven fabrics, how the woven fabric is formed by the interlacement of warp and the weft yarns. So here this mechanism is basically showing that how interlacing takes place. So the green one is representing the needle thread. This portion is representing the needle. This is the needle thread, and the bobbin mounted in the rotary hook is releasing its own thread, which is blue in color. As I was mentioning here also, that here two threads are used. One is the needle thread and another one is the bobbin thread coming from the bottom supply package. So that bottom thread package is nothing but this bobbin from which the second supply of the thread is coming. So these mechanisms will be more clear with the help of short videos that I'll be showing here. So basically this part is showing the needle and this is the bobbin. So needle plus bobbin together will be forming the lock stitch, which comes under the class 300 kind of stitch. So this is the animated version of how a stitch is formed. This part is representing the needle. Here we have the bobbin. Needle shows reciprocating up and down movement and the bobbin is rotating. In the process, the stitch is being formed in such a manner where the upper and the lower thread is formed, and this is showing the front view and the back view of the lock stitch. As can be seen that the appearance on the face and the back side of the fabric is exactly similar. So this stitch is basically used where we want reversible type of for reversible garments. The stitch can be used where we require same appearance on the face and the back side. So how chain stitch is formed? So this animation is basically showing how the chain stitch is formed. So you can see here that a single thread is being used here. So this is representing class 100 single thread chain stitch. And if we see the appearance on the face and the back side, so we can have the appearance similar to lock stitch on the face side, but on the back side we will be having a chain of this kind. So coming to the first class of the stitch, the first stitch class is as we discussed is the single thread chain stitch. So it uses a single thread in its formation, as we just saw in the video that the needle is carrying the thread. There won't be any thread coming from the bottom thread package, or there is no thread supply from the underside. So in this case, one loop is passing through another loop of the same thread. So the same thread is forming the loop on the underside of the fabric, and from the same loop the newly formed loop will be passing. So if we consider this stitch portion, so this can be considered as the head of the loop, and this is the tail portion of the loop. So the head of the as we can see that the head of the loop is passing through the tail of the loop. So in this way each newly formed loop is dependent on the previous one. Here, as can be seen, if this is the new loop, the tail portion of the newly formed loop is passing through the head portion of the earlier formed loop. So in a way each loop is dependent on the previously formed loop. So there is every possible chance that if this loop breaks, so this loop will automatically come out, or it will get undone, because it is dependent on the next loop that is being formed. This is the reason that this stitch, which is formed by intra looping, is not suitable for permanent stitching purposes because of the low strength. It is very weak stitch, so it is generally used for such applications where we require temporary stitching to be applied. So that temporary stitching is basically referred to as basting operation. So basting is basically like for positioning of the stitches, we want to identify the exact stitch position. So on coat, lapels or blazers, when bespoke tailoring is done, or when stitching is to be perfect, so before the application of permanent stitches, temporary stitches are applied which can be easily removed. And since I have discussed that this stitch has got low strength because of the mechanism of intra-looping, where the newly formed loop is dependent on the previously formed loop, so it is very easy to remove it. It is very easy to unravel the stitch. So that is why it is suitable for temporary stitch applications for basting operations, but it is not suitable where we require good strength or durability of the seam. So if we come to class 200, so as I discussed, class 200 are the machine stitches which originated as the hand stitches. So they are sometimes known as hand stitches, but don't get confused. They are not formed by hand, or they are not the manual stitches, but these are stitches which can be made on machine, and their appearance can be imitated exactly as the stitches which are made by hand by use of special type of needles. For example, double pointed needles or curved needles may be used, and basically this stitch class helps in making the process less time consuming and less labor intensive, because if the same stitching is done by hand, so of course it will consume more labor, it will be time consuming process. So that is why the same kind of appearance can be have had using this class of the stitch, which is the machine stitches. This is formed by a single thread passed from one side of material to other in successive needle penetrations, and it is a slow and labor intensive process. So it is used for handcrafted articles. Slow and labor intensive processes when the hand stitching is done. So this has been replaced by use of special type of needles on the machine, so that the same stitches can be made on the machine. So these are the subclasses of the stitches. So basically in this subclasses, if we see the 3 digits 202, so this first digit represents the main class of the stitch. For example, class 100 will be written as 100, 300 as 300. So the first digit will be representing that class of the stitch, and this is representing the subclasses within that class, the type of the machine stitch. For example, 202, 209 are the types of this class 200 stitch. So these are used on lapels of blazers, shirt collars, etc. And saddle stitch is one type of class 200 stitch, which is formed by pick stitch, and it find its application in cowboy jeans. This is the application area for this stitch, and this is how the stitch type 209 or saddle stitch appears on the face and the back side of the garment. Now class 300 lock stitch is considered to be one of the secured stitch because it is formed by interlacement of the threads we just saw in the video. So this is showing the lock stitch, which uses 2 set of threads. One is the needle thread, which will make appearance on the face side of the fabric, and the bobbin thread, which will appear on the back side of the fabric. So this stitch is formed by 2 set of threads, the needle thread and the bobbin thread. And the salient or the unique feature of this stitch is that it has same appearance on the face and the back side of the fabric. So this will be the appearance on the face side, and a similar appearance will appear on the back side of the fabric. In order to distinguish, we can use 2 different color threads in the needle and the bobbin to see that which thread appears on the face and which one on the back. So the needle thread will always appear on the face side of the fabric, and the bobbin thread will always appear on the back side of the fabric. So under thread in this case is supplied from bobbin, which appears on the back side of the fabric. This stitch is good in its strength and abrasion resistance. However, there is one disadvantage associated with this stitch type. The disadvantage is that the bottom thread is supplied by means of bobbin. So bobbin has got a limited thread carrying capacity, as we saw in the earlier slide here. This is the bobbin which is supplying the under thread in case of lock stitch. So the thread is wound onto this bobbin. So this bobbin has a limited thread carrying capacity which is used in the formation of class 300 lock stitch. So because of its limited thread carrying capacity, each time the bobbin gets exhausted, the empty bobbin has to be replaced with a new bobbin. So of course the machine downtime will increase, the production will get affected, and in long production runs where we are dealing with bulk orders, so we cannot afford to stop the machine for longer duration of time. So that is the reason that this is considered to be one of the disadvantage or demerit of this machine, that bobbin supplies limited thread carrying capacity, so its thread consumption is low, so the machine has to be stopped as the bobbin gets exhausted. So lock stitch is extensively used for joining fabric collars, cuffs, pockets, facing. It is used for top stitching. It is used in reversible type of garments also, where we want the same type of appearance on the face and the back side of the garment. So this is showing the stitch type 301 and 304. So these are the these are representing the further subclasses of the stitches. Like 3 is representing the stitch class, and 1, 3, 4 in the third place represents the subclass of that stitch. So this is another modified version of the stitch, where we have zigzag appearance rather than this straight appearance. So we can see here on the fabric that we have same appearance on the face and the back side of the fabric. So here A thread is representing the needle thread, which will come on the face side of the fabric, and this is the bobbin thread, the yellow one, which will appear on the back side of the fabric. And in between the position where they are interlacing, so this is known as the bedding. This phenomena, how the threads are becoming part of the fabric, this is known as bedding phenomena, because of which the sewing thread is becoming part of the fabric structure. So we discussed one drawback of this stitch, which was related to the machine parameter, that is it has bobbin which was supplying this bottom thread, which is shown as yellow here. So the bobbin had limited thread carrying capacity, it got exhausted rapidly and machine had to be stopped. So that was related to the machine. But another drawback or disadvantage with this stitch is that because of this bedding phenomena, that is how the interlacement is taking place between the two threads, there is a possibility of seam puckering or wrinkled appearance which occurs in this kind of stitch. And because of the wrinkled appearance or this seam pucker, the appearance of the seam gets distracted, the appearance of the seam does not look worthwhile. So this is yet another drawback or demerit of this stitch. So having discussed the demerit or the drawback, we need to find a solution as to what can be better options compared to these stitches. Otherwise, this stitch, as far as its strength, its durability is concerned, it is quite a preferable stitch in permanent stitching. But yet we have discussed the two drawbacks or demerits associated with this stitch type. So so far we have discussed the mechanisms by which the stitches are formed, the basis of classification of the stitches into 6 classes. Then we discussed class 100, which is single thread chain stitch formed by intralooping, class 200, which are machine stitches which imitate or simulate the appearance of hand stitches. And then we discussed class 300, which is lock stitch, which is formed by interlacement of needle and the bobbin thread. So in the next lecture, we will be discussing the classes, stitch classes 400 to 600. Thank you.